The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. After 3 weeks of testimony, graphic evidence, and emotional witness statements, the jury had reached their decision. What began as a missing person case evolved into one of the most disturbing kidnapping trials the county had seen in decades. Today, we're taking you inside the courtroom to examine the case that shocked an entire community. In today's episode, we're breaking down a harrowing case of aggravated kidnapping that resulted in a first-degree felony conviction. While we'll be examining the legal proceedings and evidence presented in court, please be aware that this case involves serious crimes against a victim whose identity we'll protect throughout this video. The defendant, who we'll refer to as John D., to maintain focus on the legal aspects rather than sensationalism, stood accused of aggravated kidnapping, a charge that carries some of the most severe penalties in the criminal justice system. Before we dive into the courtroom proceedings, let's understand what aggravated kidnapping means legally. Kidnapping becomes aggravated when certain factors are present, such as the victim is held for ransom, the victim suffers bodily injury, the perpetrator uses or threatens to use a deadly weapon, the victim is a child under a certain age, or the kidnapping facilitates another felony. In this case, prosecutors alleged multiple aggravating factors, elevating what might have been a lesser charge to a first-degree felony with potential life imprisonment. The prosecution built their case methodically over 3 weeks. Lead prosecutor Sarah Mitchell opened with a powerful statement describing the victim's 72-hour ordeal and the calculated nature of the crime. The prosecution introduced surveillance footage showing the defendant's vehicle at multiple locations that corroborated the victim's testimony. Cell phone tower data placed the defendant's phone in the exact areas where the victim described being held captive. Physical evidence was particularly damaging. Forensic teams discovered the victim's DNA in the defendant's vehicle, along with zip ties and duct tape matching materials found at the scene where the victim was eventually discovered. Perhaps most compelling was the victim's own testimony. Taking the stand on day 8 of the trial, they provided a detailed, consistent account of their abduction and captivity. Despite intense cross-examination, their story remained unchanged, lending credibility to the prosecution's narrative. The defense attorney, Michael Reynolds, faced an uphill battle but mounted a vigorous defense centered on several key arguments. They challenged the reliability of eyewitness identification, suggesting the traumatic nature of the event could have affected the victim's memory. They questioned the chain of custody for physical evidence and attempted to introduce reasonable doubt about the DNA findings. The defense also presented an alibi, calling several witnesses who claimed the defendant was elsewhere during the time of the alleged kidnapping.
These documents directly contradict each other, and the timeline confirms it. The defense's case unravels here.
The defendant chose not to testify, a constitutional right that cannot be held against them, but one that left many questions unanswered. Several moments proved pivotal during the trial. When the prosecution played the 911 call made after the victim's escape, audible gasps filled the courtroom. The raw terror in the victim's voice was undeniable. Another critical moment came when a forensic expert testified about digital evidence recovered from the defendant's computer, including searches for how to avoid police detection and penalty for kidnapping conducted just days before the crime. The defense's attempt to suppress this evidence was denied by Judge Patricia Holloway.
Order in the court.
After 11 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree aggravated kidnapping. As the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. The victim's family wept with relief, while the defendant showed little visible emotion. The judge immediately remanded the defendant into custody, pending sentencing. At the sentencing hearing 2 months later, both sides presented arguments. The prosecution sought the maximum sentence, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime and the lasting psychological trauma inflicted on the victim. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing the defendant's lack of prior criminal history and family circumstances.
This court finds the arguments presented insufficient to warrant leniency. It is my duty to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law.
This was a calculated, cruel act that robbed the victim of their freedom and sense of security. The evidence demonstrates clear premeditation and a complete disregard for human dignity. The defendant received 45 years to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 35 years. This case exemplifies several important aspects of criminal law. The prosecution successfully demonstrated the elements required for a first-degree felony conviction: premeditation, intent, and the aggravating factors that elevated the severity. The case also highlights the importance of physical and digital evidence in modern criminal trials. Without the cell phone data, surveillance footage, and digital forensics, the prosecution's case would have relied much more heavily on testimony alone. This case serves as a sobering reminder of both the depths of criminal behavior and the importance of our justice system in holding offenders accountable. While no sentence can undo the trauma experienced by the victim, the conviction represents a measure of justice and protection for society. The victim has since become an advocate for kidnapping victims and has worked with lawmakers to strengthen penalties for such crimes. If you or someone you know is a victim of kidnapping or abduction, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children or your local law enforcement immediately. Thank you for watching. If you found this case analysis informative, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more true crime courtroom coverage. Let us know in the comments what case you'd like us to cover next.